following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. This week, I'm going to talk about the reality that every relationship goes through rough patches where you're just not on the same page, to say the least. This is a reality of life, and yet I hear the phrase, I hate conflict, or I'm conflict avoidant, at least once a week. In terms of human relationships, this is like saying, I hate food, because a certain amount of conflict is essential to maintaining healthy relationships and maintaining personal boundaries. Think about it as like fiber for your relationships. It just makes everything pass through smoother. This is getting gross. TLDR, being afraid of conflict means being afraid of life. But it's totally socially acceptable to insist that conflict gives you anxiety as an excuse to avoid conflict. Here's the thing. Conflict gives everyone anxiety. And if you don't tackle problems when they're small, they get bigger. But conflict resolution is a learned skill. Okay, granted, that point might get lost on you if you read articles on the subject. Those articles, this is something that really drives me crazy about the self-help sort of psychology space. These articles tend to use the language of attachment theory. Nothing wrong with that, but they focus on childhood and they often don't give any advice for people who did not grow up in nurturing, structured environments. Now, to be clear, I'm not trying to dump on attachment theory. No. I just find that too many people find out their alleged attachment style, then use it as a justification to not improve themselves because it's just my personality. I had bad parents. Yeah, okay. All of these sorting systems, there's a risk of stripping the nuance out of the human experience. Cue why I hate the sorting hat in Harry Potter speech. Okay, here's my TED Talk, okay? I always found it awful in those books. Yes, I read the books before the movies. That the path of someone's entire life gets determined by a magical hat when they're 11 years old. Like, you get sorted into Gryffindor, you're heroic. If you're in Ravenclaw, you're smart and like puzzles. I happen to love puzzles. But I got sorted into Slytherin. And that means I'm just the default bad guy, which sort of makes a lot of sense. But what? And if you're in Hufflepuff, you're nice, I guess. Badger's gonna badger. I've found this whole sorting hat concept instantly and thoroughly horrible. Your life does not end up on a glide path at the age of 11. Where am I going with this? Attachment theory, Big Five personality test, Enneagrams, Myers-Briggs inventories, all that stuff. They all have the same potential pitfall. If you use them as an endpoint instead of a starting point, you risk making your weaknesses more profound instead of using your strengths to improve. When it comes to conflict, it's very important to recognize the things that are going to make you see red and escalate. And it's okay to avoid those as long as you have alternatives that don't make you see red, make you see green, like Slytherin. Yeah, green is a good color, right? But anyway, as long as you have alternatives that still facilitate solving the problem, then it's okay to avoid the stuff that, red means stop. On the other hand, let's not talk about it, drop it, when are you going to let that go? Or how many times do I have to tell you? None of these phrases have ever solved a single problem ever. In fact, they're more likely to foster resentment and damage the relationship further. But these are go-to statements for conflict-averse people. Okay, I gotta catch myself. Conflict-averse people is too generalized, isn't it? We all have types of conflict that we are better at and worse at than others based on our unique mixes of insecurity and bad past experiences. Personally, my least favorite fights to have are fights involving money. My experience is that those fights tend to be the nastiest fights out there. And at the end of them, the only people who benefit are the lawyers and occasionally accountants. The occasional fiduciary as well. Other people I know are fine with those business fights. They thrive in the business fights. It energizes them. But they go to absolute pieces regarding anything with feelings. Then you have the people who can't separate the two. Trying to talk about feelings like a business deal is, well, real talk, worse than recognizing that business isn't just about money. But too many people treat business decisions as personal slights against them as well. At the end of the day, all these bad experiences with conflict come down to the fact that there was a rupture in the relationship, business or personal, without a repair. I didn't make up those rupture and repair terms, by the way. Rupture and repair is a concept in psychology that deals with the reality that all relationships go through periods where connection is broken and then, ideally, the connection is reestablished. Since connections to other people are essential for human beings, learning to repair those connections is an essential life skill that is unfortunately primarily learned by mimicry instead of any educational or career entity making it a priority to teach. If you look at the generational slogans that fuel the New Age movement, stuff like turn on, tune in, drop out. I know I'm dating myself there, but it all focused on externalizing your internal world while simultaneously disconnecting from external relationships and commitments to other people. Yes, the boomers who created this phrase were rebelling against the enforced pragmatism of their parents, who, in fairness, had survived both the Great Depression and the World Wars using a form of resiliency that combined duty and community, but kind of neglected the individual. The boomers, as a reaction, became highly individualized, and that peaked in the greed is good 1980s. But the thing about greed is that it's great at rupturing relationships, but it's incompatible with maintaining and repairing them. Now, every generation since the boomers has tried to find a new quick fix for the challenges of getting along with others. My generation, Gen X, had performative apathy. Pretending not to care isn't good for relationships. I own that. Millennials went the exact opposite way to Gen X and embraced causes and movements to the point that it became profoundly antisocial. But if millennials created the I'm not here to make friends, Gen Z perfected it. To Gen Z's credit, they know it's a problem. They're just currently kind of lost figuring out what to do about it. And then there's the alphas, who are just delighting me in the way that they form social bonds with confounding nonsense memes. I love this. I'm like the one Gen X person who loves like 6, 7. I love it. Dear adults expressing so much annoyance over alpha slang. You've become the boring, out-of-touch bully parents in Twisted Sisters We're Not Gonna Take It video that your middle schooler is imagining defenestrating with an electric guitar. Yes, millennial parents, you've become that guy. You've become the boomers in 80s music videos. You were warned that OK Boomer was gonna come back to bite you. Here's the thing. The friendship model of uniting against a common foe is great for creating ruptures. We're not gonna take it, but does nothing to facilitate repair. Now that we've come to the end of the road, which is probably why people live in fear of cancel culture. But after a very polarized era, I can't tell if it started in like 2008, 2012, whatever. It's been a minute. But there are public conversations going on about reconciliation. That's a weasel word. You don't reconcile something being broken. you repair it. And relationships need rounds of repairs. Just like everything else you want to keep around for a while. We know we have to repair our house. We know we have to repair our car. We even repair our favorite necklace, but we don't think so much about repairing relationships. So that's what we're going to talk about today. How relationships rupture and how to repair them. Now, do you have questions about this? Do you have a story you think would be good for the show? Are you interested in sponsoring the show? Sponsors, we love you. NotTherapyShow.com is the website. At NotTherapyShow on social media. At Liana at NotTherapyShow is my email. Why did I brain fart there? Oh my goodness, my brain just ruptured. Relationships rupture and repair when we come back on It's Not Therapy after this break.
The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca.
We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and we are still talking about relationships, rupture, and repair. And you may not think that you need a walkthrough about how relationships break down because you've experienced it so very many times. But experiencing a breakdown in communication and understanding it aren't the same thing, my friends. A very common mistake people make is to jump to the conclusion that the person they fell out with suddenly turned into some cartoon villain instead of what's more likely to be true. There's a misunderstanding somewhere along the line, or someone's insecurities got tripped. Let's face it, the reason we jump to the conclusion that someone just did an epic heel turn, like I'm talking the John Cena heel turn in WWE, is because it creates an instant permission structure to do a heel turn of our own. It's a thought process that makes 100% emotional sense and absolutely zero logical sense. And here's the thing, emotional sense isn't actually sense, right? It's feels. It makes complete emotional sense because adrenaline is making you want to cut loose in that moment. But logically, what if you're wrong in the assumptions you're making? Then the lashing out that you really want to do won't be reciprocal, just like no one wanted a John Cena heel turn in his retirement tour of the WWE. I will stop making wrestling metaphors, okay? Your emotions tell you, just like the WWE writer's room, that no, I can't be wrong. No, a Cena heel turn, it's going to be amazing. I said I'd stop. I'm stopping. Okay. Emotions love certainty, even if it's false certainty. You feel like someone has just turned into your worst enemy because that makes your decisions easier in the short term. Because it's easier, because it's taking away from your cognitive load. It must be true. Unfortunately, the likelihood is it is not, in fact, true. Life is not a movie or a wrestling plot, and lashing out, therefore, creates a rupture. Now, the flip side of this false certainty is the go-to, everyone's gonna hate me. This is a thing with the generations that grew up texting and chatting, right? My Gen X brain struggles with this one because I don't assume anyone cares enough about me to hate me until I see proof. Gen X apathy, yeah. But if there's even the slightest lull in a group chat or text conversation, some people's brains immediately jump to, they'll hate me. It's an example of something that is normal. Yeah, we all know. Yeah, I know that, or I am that. But it's profoundly unhealthy. Hear me out, okay? It's unhealthy because the more you indulge in, they'll hate me, the more you start needing proof that they don't hate you. And eventually, that starts to look like you don't trust your friends. When in fact, it's yourself that you don't trust. And that causes a rupture People get sick of constant loyalty tests. That's why it creates a break in the relationship. I'm not saying this to blame anyone or call anyone out. Quite the opposite. These are amazing realizations because this is something you can control on your end. Too many people just leap, they panic to try to fix things, before they figure out what actually broke. And this does not work. If you change your muffler when you needed an oil change, doesn't do much good, right? You got a brand spanking new muffler, but as painful as it can be to figure out what went wrong, because it really means reliving everything, it's important to get right what went wrong instead of just trying to move on or drop it, right? Okay, no, it is possible to overdo this, reliving. Even though ruptures are very rarely all one person's fault, if you struggle with self-blame, it's impossible to separate what you did to contribute with what you did wrong. Often in these things, no one did anything flat out wrong. There are exceptions to this, obviously. But overall, we're a little too focused on right versus wrong reasoning when there are alternatives. Right versus right reasoning. Wrong versus wrong reasoning. Greatest of goods, lesser of evils, all that stuff. What I'm trying to say is it doesn't have to be about who was right and who was wrong. The most important first question to ask yourself is whether you want to keep the relationship. And sometimes people don't. I've been in that situation, at some point you're just like, I don't want to bother anymore. It's not worth it anymore. I want to walk away. And sometimes the hardest thing to do in life is to just accept that. And I say this as somebody, the last conversation I ever had with my biological father was me saying, get help, get into therapy, and then call me. And he never did. And it was a hard lesson. He tried to manipulate other people, notably my sister. He tried to lean on my mother, but he never did the simple thing I asked him to do. Work on yourself, get therapy, then give me a call. And what that taught me is that was a totally reasonable thing to ask. And I was like 15, 16 years old at the time I did that. Yeah, being the bigger person with your parent when you're a teenager, fun times. But it taught me no one is required to talk to you. Not every rupture is gonna have a great reason. Who in their right mind chooses avoiding therapy over their kid? Sometimes it does just come down to that. Avoidance, denial, a lack of people skills, a lack of self-worth, and that can be very much one-sided. You cannot fix a rupture single-handedly. And trying to fix a rupture single-handedly will just create a deeper rupture. Because, when you try to force something, you're risking boundary violations. It always takes two people to repair a relationship, even if it's just as simple as a person giving the other person that one more chance, that one more hearing, right? It always takes two. That does not mean that you insist no, you go first because it takes two. Like, it takes two. So you show me, right? We'll get to these pitfalls when we get to the repair segment, right? We're still on understanding ruptures. I'm going to, torture you a little bit because this is the whole point. You can't skip steps. And when your feelings are hurt, you really want to skip steps. And the biggest step you want to skip is listening. It can sometimes feel like the hardest thing to do in the world to listen when our feelings are hurt. But this very hard thing is a very useful skill to learn. This isn't only for other people. It's a benefit to you as well. When we're scared, hurt, or angry, we tend to filter the things other people say through the lenses of our fear, hurt, and anger. And so those things other people say land more negatively because of that filter than, they would if we had more emotional equilibrium. And no matter how badly someone hurt or frightened you, you are responsible for your own actions. That's why I shared that thing with my dad, because right. He probably blamed me for stuff until the day he died, but he was the parent, right? Now, if you flip that around, right, if no matter how emotionally knocked off balance you are responsible for your own actions. That does not mean to blame for your own actions. Responsibility is not blame. We'll get to that in a bit. Flip that around. If someone is hurt or frightened because of something you did, making their feelings the crux of the problem communicates a lot. If you're making the other person's feelings the problem, that causes another rupture in the emotional bond, in the relationship, in the communication, because feelings are always valid. Behaviors, words, maybe not so much. You can be upset and not just blow up. You can be upset and not shut down. Now, if you have issues with blame, it's going to be very difficult for you to see through that blame, to not blow up or shut down and repair the connection between you and the other person. And nothing other people do will repair your relationship with blame, because that's formed in childhood. If you don't face your own blame issues, it's going to be very difficult to repair any other relationship in your life, because relationship repair is incompatible with avoiding owning your part, because you're afraid you'll get blamed for everything, or you'll blame yourself for everything. Blame gets in the way. It's also very difficult to repair ruptures if you're doing the blaming. Recognizing that someone hurt you doesn't automatically mean that the other person did something wrong and must apologize. Someone demanding an apology was actually the straw that broke the camel's back. It was a tiny rupture in a relationship with, I realized in that moment, a lot of them, and I walked away from it. The problem with them demanding an apology, it wasn't even, I want an apology. It's like, you haven't apologized yet. They actually said, you haven't given me a reciprocal apology. It was actually labeled, wow, you just went there. Problem was, I didn't believe that the thing they were demanding the apology for was something I needed to apologize for. Because when it came down to it, they were demanding I apologize for a perception that they had of me. I didn't agree with it. And let me tell you, I really worked. I did a ton of contortions trying to find something I could sincerely apologize for. And my best efforts, I admit, weren't that great. And the minute I sent it, I'm like, okay, that probably sounded passive aggressive because it was just agonized. And then I got angry because I forced myself, right? What it came down to was I ended up feeling like it was more of a hostage situation than an actual attempt to work things out. And I knew the person on a good day knew better than to coerce a reciprocal apology. I had never heard that term before, and I read a lot of psychology stuff and mental health stuff and therapy stuff, right? Now, fair. It was far from the first time this person's lack of emotional regulation had gotten the better of them. It was just the point that I'd had enough. You know, it was that moment. This wasn't going to get repaired. I didn't feel heard in the slightest, because if I had felt heard, we wouldn't have kept going back to that, in my opinion. That was it. Like, I could talk to this for another hour. The point is, I'd had enough. I was done. I wanted out. And people are allowed to do that. That's something to keep in mind if you truly want to understand ruptures. People have the right to walk away from you or anyone else for any reason or no reason. If you don't accept this, you put too much pressure on relationships, right? Again, I shared that thing with my biological father because, yup, he was just like, see ya, girl. I have to accept it. I can't change it, you know? If you force it, you screw things up. If you beg, you screw things up. And I see people pretty regularly screwing things up this way. They speed up trying to fix things before they know what's really broken. And the best thing to do when a rupture has happened is, you're going to hear this a lot this episode, slow the heck down. Especially when it's a very close relationship. In very close relationships, deep hurts, those ruptures, they can feel like the end of the world. Like, heartbreak is real. And when that happens, we can start feeling like that lonely, frightened kid we were when our parents had opportunities to teach us that ruptures don't have to be the end of relationships. And instead, they taught us that their love and even their presence was conditional or even transactional. And real talk, this internal struggle, it's no one's problem but our own. No one can fix this for us but us. And this is actually the beginning of hope. Top 10 phrase, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. And people will probably be like, what? How is this is no one's problem but our own? Hope. Hear me out. People hate this part, but it's true. Okay? No adult can take away the sting of having cruddy parents. Trust me, I've tried. Or even good parents that made some pretty massive mistakes. Got that too, okay? If you expect a boyfriend to make you feel better that daddy didn't love you, that's not fair to the boyfriend. See also girlfriends and your mother. Your wife is not your mother. Your wife is your wife. Your wife is not a do-over mommy. Your husband is not your father. Your husband is your husband. Your husband is not a do-over daddy. Set your expectations and behave accordingly. It's unwise to expect your spouse to parent you, especially when you have your own kids that you don't want to screw up like you were screwed up, right? Now, this doesn't mean you can't hope or even expect your partner. Oh God, I almost Freudian slipped there and said parent. Your partner. This doesn't mean you can't hope or even expect your partner to care about your fear and pain. Of course, they should care about your fear and pain. If they don't care about your fear and pain, why are they your partner, right? But caring about your fear and pain and being responsible for it are not the same thing. And if you're making them responsible for your feelings, you're giving them no space to willingly care about your feelings of their own volition. And if you think that making someone care or manipulating them into caring is normal, you probably got that watching how your parents interacted. Right, yeah. And here we are. So the moral of the story, if you sense a rupture has happened, don't panic, don't leap to try to insta-fix it, slow down. Find out what broke. Don't freeze the other person out or blame them, and make the repair something you figure out together. Right, now we can talk about the repair process after the break. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. At nottherapyshow is me on social media. Relationships, rupture, and repair continues with the repair part after this break on It's Not Therapy.
The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca.
We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We are still talking about relationships, rupture, and repair. And we've come to the repair part. It took a while. Yes, that's doing it right. Remember, it's better to go slow, identify the rupture, and that can be difficult if you have massive abandonment issues. A lot of people in this process leave out communications like, I want to work this out, we'll get through this, because first and foremost, they're afraid of appearing weak or giving up ground in an argument. Do I have to tell you that that's doing it wrong? Well, maybe I do. Here we go. Let's do it. Vulnerability isn't weakness. Vulnerability is necessary to reestablish the emotional connection that has been ruptured. If you can't be vulnerable, it's going to be very, 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 very hard to repair an emotional connection. If you can't admit you're hurt or whatever, and you can't admit anything you did to contribute to the conflict or whatever, what's the problem? You're not hurt. You're totally emotional balanced. Why are you fighting so hard, man? Like, the answer I hear 100% of the time to this challenge. If you're not angry, why are you so off balance? If you're not hurt, why are you so off balance? If you're not frightened, why are you so off balance? 100% of the time, the response I get is, I'm frustrated. I'm irritated. And I know these are valid emotions, but I'm going to be selfish for a moment. If I could remove one word from the collective emotional vocabulary, it would be frustrated. At some point, being angry became unallowable. Being angry was inherently bad and scary and wrong. Angry became the Y2K virus of feelings. Wow, that's a dated reference. Anyway, so people didn't stop getting angry, but they did stop admitting they were angry. And the replacement became, they are frustrated. Why did they lash out? They're frustrated. Why did they call you names? They were frustrated. Why did they dredge up stuff you did 3 years ago? Like you'd never worked through it. They're frustrated. Why did they start blaming you for everything and attacking your character? They're frustrated. It's like a freaking clone ad, right? Except here's the thing. Grown adults are expected to emotionally regulate, so I was frustrated isn't a good reason to do any of that stuff I just mentioned. You're frustrated when you miss a bus, but you can't take it out on the next bus driver. So guess what? You also can't take it out on your spouse, your kids, or the family pet. No, really, it's not good. If you want relationships to not rupture beyond repair, you need to own this and take steps to learn to regulate your emotions. And an emotion like anger that you can't even admit you have, I guarantee you're not regulating it if you're in denial that you're feeling it in the first place. And that goes for any feeling you deny you have. Fear, right? Disappointment. Disappointment was one for me. And before you jump on me, I just said disappointment was the one I struggled with. No one is ever perfectly emotionally regulated and can't be expected to be. We all get tired, thrown off, caught off guard, and overwhelmed. And admitting this does not automatically make you to blame for everything. And if someone attempts to blame you for everything because you took responsibility for something, you are allowed to set boundaries. There, I just saved you 10 years of therapy for me, right? You're allowed to set boundaries. I know that sounds sad, but it's true, right? And the thing about boundaries is they are also essential to relationship repair. About a year ago, almost exactly, a year and a month, I ended a lengthy friendship because the so-called friend kept accusing me when I was in an active PTSD trigger of being deliberately cruel. Now, I was willing to own that I lost it because trigger, but nothing I had done there was deliberate. And frankly, nothing they insisted I did was so horrible that it sounded terribly cruel to me. Unfortunately, this friend, for whatever reason, even though I said, stop, like, look, I lost it, sure, but I'm not going to agree that it was deliberately cruel. He just kept going back to that deliberate cruelty, deliberate cruelty, deliberate cruelty. It wasn't true the first time he said it. It wasn't true the fourth time he said it. It ruptured the friendship. Now, the logic fault in this to me was clear. Even at the time, even in my compromised state, I thought at the time, well, if you think that about me, if you think I am an intentionally cruel person, why are you my friend? And then I realized, yeah, okay. They probably didn't even mean it for that exact reason. You know, unless they themselves thought that deliberate cruelty was sometimes okay. And something clicked into place there, and I'm not going to go there. I don't have to. Either way, they think I'm a deliberately cruel person. They themselves think deliberate cruelty is okay. That's an unsolvable problem on my end. I'm out. You'll never repair a friendship. You'll never repair a rupture by allowing false accusations to stand. You don't have to agree that you did something you didn't do for a friendship. Why? Well, it's simple. Each false accusation is another connection rupture. That's what makes repair so challenging. You can only do your part. You can't force the other person to do theirs. So sometimes, despite your best efforts, sometimes things can't be repaired. Obviously, with children, different story, right? Kids have tantrums, they lash out, they lie, that perception is reality, especially with teenagers, because they haven't developed the emotional skills to not do these things. But even with children, you shouldn't agree something was your fault to be nice. That gives them a false sense of appropriate behavior. No, really. Really. So how do you repair emotional communication ruptures? If you've been uncomfortable thus far, I got to say thus far, you're really not going to like this. Okay, so you can be disappointed. You can disagree with various things. You can be angry. You can't insist the other person is bad. If you do, you've made a mistake. Someone's choice of words can be bad. Someone's behavior can be bad, but you better give them specifics about why. But when you start just summarizing an entire segment of a person's character as bad, or just going, that behavior was bad, and not elaborating, you risk the reaction I had. If you think I'm so bad, okay, I accept that that's your opinion. I'm out. And if you stop to think about that, that's really the only rational response. Fighting with a bad person is getting down in the muck with a pig. You both get dirty, but the bad person, they like it. Now, you can introduce clear things you need from the other person to fix the rupture, to make you feel better. That's a negotiation. And ideally, it lands in a place you're both okay with. Here's an example. If you think one of their friends treats you badly, you may really want them to cut off contact with that friend because you think they're a bad influence. But You'll compromise by saying, look, they can hang around their friend. You're not going to be around them. And if they show up somewhere, you're going to leave. This is not punishment. This is setting a boundary. You're not saying that the person you're compromising with has to leave too. And, you're not going to take it out on them if they decide to stay, unless, of course, they start informing you about a bunch of stuff the toxic person said about you after you left or something. Common sense applies. But ideally, the other person respects your dislike or desire to keep distance from the other person. If they start criticizing your discomfort, saying you're too sensitive or something, well, that's another rupture. You see how this works? Now, some people complain this is keeping score, but it's not. It's just the way people work. If you're forcing everyone around you repeatedly out of their comfort zone so that you can do what you want, it doesn't matter if you think they're too sensitive or not. It doesn't matter if you think they can't just let things go. They're eventually going to put up walls where you're concerned to do what you claim you want them to do. Be less sensitive. Here's the problem. Less sensitive also means less connected. Rupture. The problem when arguments get really heated is that those instances of yelling, blaming, name-calling, stonewalling, abandoning, those pile up. And every one of those is an individual rupture. For me, yelling is frankly the least bad of all of them. And I'm not saying it has to be for you. Just for me, someone can raise their voice without realizing it. Or, hey, look out, you're about to get hit by something, right? That's not yelling in anger, right? That just happens. That's different than someone choosing to say, it's all your fault, stupid. When it comes right down to it, ask yourself, what's more important, being right or the relationship? Winning or the relationship? Unloading on the other person or the relationship? Getting the last word or the relationship? If the answer isn't the relationship, you haven't done anything wrong. Just don't expect the other person to prioritize what you're not willing to. Again, listen. Really listen. If you don't know what to say, listen. Ask questions. And for God's sakes, don't be obsessed with how much you get to talk. I say this as a person with PTSD who has spent my life being blamed for things that couldn't possibly be my fault, starting, at least as far as I can remember, when I was 6 years old. Nothing anyone can possibly say can stop an adult from blaming a 6-year-old because it's not a rational act in the first place. Concessions are not capitulations. In fact, they're displays of strength if you think about it. Sincere apologies don't mean it's your fault either. Apologies are about seeing what went wrong and where you can go right in the future. If you have a tendency to be critical, recognize the consequence of this. A person is not going to be comfortable telling you how you can fix a mistake if you're likely to respond with, no, that's stupid, I can't do that. Any question you ask, really be prepared to hear an answer and act on it. Making space to recover from strong reactions or emotions, either in yourself or another person, is good. Going on at length about how scary, out of control, difficult, or annoying the other person was is not. You were annoyed. They were not annoying. You were afraid. But if you really think that the person overall is scary, that's a sign of a very serious problem and possibly an abusive relationship. So watch that claim. Here's the thing. I have PTSD. It's not very common right now, but I still get triggered. And whenever that happens, I'm embarrassed enough without hearing how awful it was for someone else to experience me. You know, if you've got somebody with PTSD in your life, PTS, whatever they want to call it, that going on at length about how awful it is to deal with their condition is guaranteed to result in a person with trauma, considering whether you'd be better off without them in your life. So please be as supportive as possible while still expressing your feelings. You know, you're not going to agree on everything. Don't get hung up on the disagreements. If you're stuck on something, move on to something that you might be able to find consensus on. That might even unlock a solution, at least a partial one, to the thing that you got stuck on. Yes, you did. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. That's a colossal waste of time for everyone's time and energy. And I can go on with pointers again and again and again, but it really comes down to go slow, respect boundaries, tell people that you care about them. Now, some of you might realize that you've been going on about relationships really, really wrong. And that means there's probably a lot of ruptures and a lot of walls. So what do? I'll give you some hope after our final break. Questions, comments, any feedback, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. At nottherapyshow on social medias. Relationships, ruptures, and repairs. How to repair the older ruptures when we come back on It's Not Therapy.
The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca.
We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We have very little time in this show, but like I said, you were raised wrong, were taught a lot of bad habits, and now you're sitting back and looking at how you've conducted your relationships and realize you have really, really screwed up. Yeah. Okay. You gotta make changes. You gotta own that. The thing is, it's better to be the start of the change. It's better to come to somebody when, you're not in conflict and go, look, here are the things that I feel that I have done badly. And I appreciate you sticking with me through that. You see the appreciation? That forms a bond. But it's not just, I feel so bad. No, it's, I appreciate you. I want you in my life. I want to do better. Can we talk about how that can be done? You don't have to mind read. In fact, it's better if you don't try. And you don't have to fix it. People are not cars. They're people. You will usually get a better result working as a team to solve the problem than trying to get out ahead of the problem single-handedly. Try it. It's a start, right? I wish I could talk for 2 hours on this, but I gotta go. Questions, comments, concerns, any feedback whatsoever. Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. Website. At nottherapyshow on social media. Remember, you're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. See you next time.